and welcome to Security Gets Serious. This is episode 7. Today we have Mark Weatherford. Mark Weatherford is one of the leading voices in cybersecurity. He's got a career that spans both public and private sectors. Mark has had a profound impact on the way we approach cybersecurity at the highest levels. Mark served as the first Deputy Undersecretary for Cybersecurity at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, where he led national efforts to secure critical infrastructure from evolving cyber threats. His extensive experience includes leadership roles in the private sector, where he's advised companies on improving their cybersecurity posture in the face of increasing challenges. Mark's expertise in risk management, cyber resiliency, and policy development has made him a sought-after voice in discussions surrounding national security, cybersecurity regulations, and the evolving threat landscape. He's currently the VP of Policy and Standards at Gretel. Today, we'll dive into some of the most pressing issues facing the cybersecurity world, including ransomware, infrastructure security, and the innovations transforming the industry. Mark, thanks for joining us today. Let's get serious.
Thanks, Ben. Let's get serious.
I like it. All right. So we'll start off. I want to talk to you about kind of your background, and you've held high-profile cybersecurity roles in both government and private sector. So what drove you to pursue a career in this space?
Wow. I can say it was not plotted or planned in advance. I've been in the right place at the right time. When I got out of the Navy, actually, let me start earlier. In 1994, I was in grad school and I wrote my thesis on information security, and it changed the trajectory of my life. Both in the Navy, following grad school, I had the opportunity to go, and I was actually the network security officer. And again, this is mid-90s.
Novell Netware.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I haven't heard that in ages. But then after I got out of the Navy, I was actually working for a defense contractor. I was working for Raytheon as a program manager on a missile defense agency program, and basically making sure that the developers were not doing anything too crazy and stupid, which was a full-time job. And literally out of the blue. And, I never thought about going to work in the government. But out of the blue, I got a call and said, hey, you should be applying for this job for the CISO for the state of Colorado. So I did, and a couple months later, I was working in the government, and it was kind of interesting. I'm still convinced. Governor Bill Owens hired me, and I know that he did not know what I did, but I think he heard that
it's kind of a common thread for a lot of CISOs.
Yeah,
I think.
True. That's true. And but it was interesting, at the time. And this could never happen today. I worked directly for the governor.
Wow.
So, and he had an open door policy. So if I had an issue, I call his secretary and I say, hey, I need to talk to the governor, and walk right in and see the governor.
Okay.
Of course, that was, that was 18, 19 years ago. So, but it was a great experience from the perspective of, I was the first one. There was no policies in place. There was no infrastructure in place, and I got to basically create everything from whole cloth. And I'll be the first to admit it. I've told people I wasn't really sure what I was doing at the time. I understood security, but how do you build a program when there's literally nothing there?
Yeah, the greenfield environment.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And fortunately, I had a champion in the Senate, and he said, "Hey, shouldn't we have your role codified in government?" And I said, "Yeah, I think we should." So we spent a year, Senator Ron May, and we spent a year crafting the legislation, and it was kind of my first exposure. It definitely was my first exposure to the kind of the way legislation is created, and it's not pretty.
What an interesting way to get introduced to legislation.
Oh my gosh, it's like, I said, here's all the things we have to have in this legislation. Well, then the horse trading starts, and you go to senators on the other side of the aisle, and they're like, well, you can't say that, or we can't do that. So we spent a lot of time, crafting and making sure that everyone was happy. And it wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good. And it was the first legislation in the United States for all states. So we created the first legislation codifying the CISO in state government. And I feel like I'm giving my resume here. Then Terry Takai, who had been the CISO in Michigan, Schwarzenegger hired her to come into California and be a CIO. And she called me and said, hey, do you want to come and work for the Schwarzenegger and do what you did in Colorado in California? And
then you said, I'll be back.
I said, I'll be. Yeah. So, I ended up there, and I stayed until the end of the Schwarzenegger administration, and then went off and moved to D.C. at the time, actually, and went into the North American Electric Reliability Corporation at NERC, and was the chief security officer there. And again, wonderful experience. I mean, working with the utilities across the nation was the best experience I've ever had. And good people, good mission, and wanting to do the right thing. And honestly, I thought this is the last job I would ever have. I'm just going to stay here for as long as they'll have me. And one day I got a call. A guy says, hey, I work for President Obama, and we'd like for you to come to work in the government, and in the federal government. And of course, my response would be probably what your response is, like, yeah, who's pranking me here? And he said, no, I'm serious. It was on. I can remember it was on a Friday, and I said, I really don't have a lot of interest in coming back into the government. And so the weekend, he says, well, I'll call you back on Monday. So I spent the weekend. I called all of my friends. I called a couple of people that had influence in the government, and I'm like, is this real? I mean, what do you think? And literally everybody said, you can't say no.
Yeah.
This is a job you just can't say no to. A huge pay cut, but my God, the responsibilities were just immense. And so I went to work at DHS, and good people there, amazing people. And a lot of times government employees they don't have the best reputation, but man, the people at DHS that I worked with, they were hardworking, they were all mission oriented, and we had responsibility basically for all of the civilian federal government, and everything except DOD and Intel. And in addition, I was responsible for all of the critical infrastructures, not responsible for them, but responsible for the government's entree into all of the critical infrastructure. So it was a very heady job for me. I mean, but again, spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill, working with legislators on a variety of things now. Cyber was becoming a bit more mainstream in the conversation, and so I did that, and then did that for a couple of years, left there, went to work for the Chertoff Group, and of course, Michael Chertoff had been the second secretary of DHS in the George Bush administration. So they wanted to build a cybersecurity piece of the practice at the Chertoff Group, so I came in and was there for a few years doing that. And then I went, my first trip to Silicon Valley, I went and joined a little startup company for a couple of years. Left there and went to Booking Holdings. Booking Holdings is a travel brand. They own Kayak, OpenTable, Priceline, Agoda, Booking, and a bunch of other smaller companies. And very interesting, but and it was good. Again, good people. The CISOs there, all of them are friends of mine to this day. Mm-hmm. But it didn't really have the kind of mission that I would like. I mean, I came from working for, doing, national security type stuff to working for a travel agency.
Yeah.
And again, loved it. I don't have anything bad to say about it. But then again, it was just before COVID. In fact, I resigned in February, February of 2020, and COVID hit, in March of 2020.
Yeah.
So it was a good time to be out of the travel business. Their revenue went to like zero overnight. So, and I actually thought that, that was kind of my last job. I was going to go. I bought a little ranch in Colorado. I'm like, I'm just going to raise cows, but I kept my finger on the pulse of things, and I consulted a little bit, and as you said, I recently just joined an AI synthetic data company, Gretel, and
they sucked
I'm
you back in
the
huh?
game. I'm back in the game, baby.
That is super impressive background in history. You've done a ton of stuff. Over that course of time, what's the most unexpected lesson you've learned in the cybersecurity industry?
I think maybe, I don't know if it's unexpected. Yeah, I think it's unexpected. It's that, we plan and plan and plan, and we're always wrong. Not always, I shouldn't say it like that. But, when I first got into the business, everybody wanted a 5-year strategic plan. Well, in our industry, as we were talking earlier,
super hard to plan.
The threat and vulnerability environment changes on a daily basis. So, the things, and I know you know this too, you feel my pain. The things that I worried about 12 months ago are not the things I'm worried about today. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've adjusted to over the years.
I think that's hard conceptually. When you think about business leaders, I think that's one of the frustrating and hard things to kind of get that synergy with the other business leaders in the org, is because everybody's stuff changes quickly, right? But I think for us, it changes in a way that's substantial, that, sales doesn't change, marketing doesn't change, legal doesn't change, right? The legal landscape, new laws, but like the emergence of AI, the emergence of like impactful cyber, and the changes in the threat landscape, like that changes just so fast. It's really a different conceptual thing for, I think, the rest of the business to understand the challenges that we face. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree 100%, and I think you're exactly right. Most of the business does not change. And, this comes back to me, and it's happened to me, and it's happened to you, and it happens to all of our security friends. And you go back to your budget planning every year, and your board or your CEO's like, wait a minute, didn't we just spend money on this last year? Why are we doing it again this year?
Yeah.
And so, we're constantly reinventing ourselves because, as we said earlier, the threat and vulnerability environment is changing so rapidly that, who would have ever thought? I can still remember November 2022 when ChatGPT came out, and I'm thinking, this is interesting. And like 30 days later, they had 1 million users. I'm like, there's something here.
Yeah, crazy adoption.
And now we see what's happening with Gen AI and how it's changing the security landscape. How Gen AI and ML, how we've adopted these technologies into our security products, our security services, and they're making life better for us.
And worse too, because I think the threat actors are adopting them as well, right?
Absolutely.
Like phishing has gotten logarithmically better.
Oh my gosh! It's funny you say that. I literally an hour ago, I got an email from UPS saying, "Hey, you have a package being delivered," and I'm like, I said, "Sharon, did you order something from you?" And she said, "No." I'm like, "It's going to Corona, California. Why would?" And I'm like, holy cow, and I went and looked, and it said it's from UPS. I'm like, this has got to be a fish.
Yeah. It's gotten crazy what the landscapes look like. So again, thinking about over your career, what do you go back and tell your younger self if you could meet him? That like, what advice would you give them starting out in cybersecurity now? What do you wish you knew?
Well, I think it's advice that I have lived by, and I know we say this. I know this is going to sound cliche as heck, but people matter. Our people matter, and I think we often don't give our people enough credit. We don't support them well enough. We just expect that they're going to be excellent. And for them to be excellent, we need to give them the right resources. And I'll give you an example. I can remember when the cloud became a thing, and I gave a talk to a bunch of CISOs, and I said, hey, we need to pay attention to this. I think this is going to change things. And I just, and of course, everyone at the time go, over my dead body, am I going to put my stuff out in some cloud somewhere?
Yeah.
But I just assumed that my staff, my team, were going to be able to transition from client server to cloud.
Doesn't work that easy.
Horrible assumption, I mean, and we didn't train properly, and all of a sudden everybody's going, well, wait a minute, I don't understand this, and you expect me to understand it, but I don't. So I think, taking care of our people is just, it's just good leadership of nothing else. I think being adaptive to change. Again, when you look at you mentioned Novell. When we look at the transition from Novell networks, oh my gosh, how much the world has changed since then. We look
Token ring or Ethernet?
Both. And I'm one of those guys. Hopefully like you, I have pulled miles and miles miles of cable.
Yeah.
And up in the overhead and in the underhead, and oh my gosh. So yeah, when I feel like I paid when I got my first CISO job, I felt like I knew how to, to code route, firewall ACLs. I'd pulled cable. I had paid my dues.
Yeah, you kind of got to do it all. I think that's something that, for good or for bad, I think maybe is missing a little bit. The people coming up today, I think it's almost like they don't have the foundational, how it all started that some of us do.
It's good and bad. I think, when you and I started in this, we had books and we had to read.
Yeah.
We actually had to read. I can remember, and I'm really dating myself, back in the early 90s, I would blow my computer up once a week and have to completely rebuild it. And I can remember the old Windows operating system had 13 disks that I had to reload my OS. But it was,
What was your first computer?
Actually, I built a computer, a Heathkit H89.
There you go.
Zenith H89 in 1982.
Okay. Mine was a Timex Sinclair TS1000.
I remember.
Cassette tape recorder, put the cassette in, play.
Yeah, and I think I bought a Gateway 2000 in 1993 or something like that, and I had a Pentium 386.
Yeah, just the upgrading, right? Oh. I remember putting in chips in the memory, right?
I can remember in that H89. I actually took a chip and I'd read this somewhere, and I think in the Hug users group, Heathkit users group, you could solder, I forget which chip it was, but you could solder it on the back of another chip and quadruple your memory.
Yeah.
So it's like I went from having 16K to 64K of memory. K of memory.
Yeah. DOS and trying to maximize the memory space so you could run a program. Those were the days.
We really sound old.
We do, yeah. So let's pull it back up a little bit. So, cybersecurity is definitely evolving, and we were talking earlier about, the impact to the boardroom. And what's your current thought and philosophy on how you think cyber needs to interact or interface or influence the board and be a board topic?
Well, so I think it definitely needs to be. It has to be, and I think there was over the past couple of years there've been a couple of efforts to change the law, SEC law requiring board membership or security expertise on a board. I don't know that we need that level of engagement, but what I've been advocating for is the board needs to have an advisor, a cybersecurity advisor. Now, they can be a member of the board or not, but they need to have some kind of a formal relationship with a third party. And I say that because the CISO, there's an inherent risk of the CISO telling the board what they want to hear. For a lot of reasons, whether, the CEO standing over their shoulder saying, be careful what you say. So I think having an independent third party, and I have played that role with a Fortune 500 company for the past 5 years where I'm not an advisor to the board, but I'm an advisor to the CISO. And I help them it's like everybody drinks their own Kool-Aid. We think our ideas are the best. So having an independent party say, but did you think about this or this, I think is really important, and especially for boards, because it's changing a little bit. And it's a generational thing, I think. Boards they're getting more members who are a little more tech savvy. They're not tech ignorant like they were 10 years ago. But still, boards need to have that third party eyeball on things. Or
it's always been surprising to me that you hear this mantra that every company's a technology company, yet you don't really see boards treating it that way and having some type of membership or a third party relationship to really understand what the impact of technology is on the company, not just security, but the overall tech stack.
Yeah, that's really a good point. But I challenge people this. I'm like, pull up a website of any company in the world, any Fortune 500 company, and look at their board membership. Just look at who they are, what organizations that they have been associated with. Not many of them are tech companies.
No, I heard a stat, and it came out of Digital Directors Network. I think there's only one Fortune 500 company that has real representation with cyber or technology on the board, and it's GM. They have, I think, 3 members that are actually have practical experience in technology, and that's a shocking stat to me.
That is a shocking statistic. I would have pegged it a little bit higher than that, but
yeah.
But
I think people still value the financial expertise for the board, right? Which makes a ton of sense. But I think, it's important to have diversity and well-roundedness across the board, in the board.
100% agree. Not for all kinds of reasons. It's healthy for a board to have that kind of diversity on the board. I don't think I'll ever stop pounding this drum. They need to have cybersecurity expertise available to the board.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. So when you think about, so we talked about the board a little bit. When we think about CISOs, and you think about colleagues and the people in the industry, what's the most overlooked leadership quality that CISOs need today to be successful in their roles, like an enterprise CISO?
The easy answer is understanding politics, and I don't mean. DC
so now you're going to weigh
politics.
in on the recent election?
No. I mean, understanding that politics exists everywhere, and most CISOs. Maybe not most. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Most CISOs come from a technical background.
Most CISOs don't like the politics, I think.
I
think they want to avoid it. Yeah.
Yes.
They see it almost like you said, technical background. They see it as a binary, this is the right thing or the wrong to do from security. I don't care where it plays in the politics of the org, right?
I've heard so many people say that. I don't care if they don't like this. This is the right thing to do. I'm like, yeah, but you know what? That's gonna lead to a resume building event.
Yeah, it really does. People talk a lot about soft skills, but not thinking that that's one of the soft skills that they really need to have.
I think the politics, and it often has a negative connotation, and it doesn't have to. Politics exists everywhere, and understanding the dynamics within an organization is important, even for technologists. And I think CISOs don't embrace that well enough. And as you said, many times they just avoid it.
Yeah, 100%. So when we think about the landscape right now and what we're seeing kind of threat-wise, what's your thought about, ransomware? Ransomware attacks are certainly on the rise. We see more of them. I mean, you can look at statistics where maybe the overall number are down, but I certainly think we're seeing higher level attacks, more prevalent attacks. What do you think about that? What's your impression of the state, the landscape, ransomware right now?
Well, I think it's something that that we need to pay attention to, and I'm still blown away that some people, when they have an event and they're like, why would anybody care about me? We're just a small company. I'm like, so I think, for a whole lot of reasons, we, on a maturity level, we have not peaked. Ransomware has not peaked yet. In fact, because of the rise of ransomware as a service, we're now, anybody can get in the business. Mm-hmm. Anybody can be a player. I think we're going to see, we are seeing, and we're going to see an increase because there's just an apathy, especially in the small and medium-sized business arena. There's an apathy that it could never happen to us. When in fact, some of these affiliate organizations, if they can make $10,000, why not?
It's all about the money, right?
It's all about the money,
stupid.
And the big guys, there's kind of there may be growing to be a differentiation between people who do these small targets and people who do the big targets. I mean, it's a scaling issue. If I can make $10,000 off, 1,000 people, that's just as
well.
easy,
And I think
maybe.
automation and AI make that a lot more feasible, right?
Yeah.
And I think we see this weird, I guess, two mindsets of like small to mid-size think, why would anybody be concerned with attacking me? And then I think we see enterprises thinking, oh, I'm so resilient and I have great controls and I can't be attacked and compromised. Yet across the spectrum, we see it happening, right? I mean, on the big guys, it's, you hit a Change Healthcare and you get a $22 million ransomware payment. The impact over $2 billion, 2.7, I think it is right now, right? That's a lot more than the $22 million payment, right? And I'm certain that the $22 million was probably less of the ask of the budget for the CISO for that year, right? So it's a frustrating place we live in right now.
So this is a good point. I mean, security is all about risk management. I mean, that's really the fun. We wouldn't spend any money on security if there was no risk associated with it. So, and I know that every CISO has priorities. Sometimes their priorities are forced upon them by the organization. Every CISO has a budget, but knowing that there's this ransomware risk out there, and it's a greater than zero chance that I'm going to be a victim someday, why wouldn't I spend a little bit of my budget to take that greater than zero risk off the table? So there are technologies, Halcyon, that address this. So why wouldn't I spend a little bit of money to just avoid a risk completely? Take it off the table. Don't have to worry about it. And I think a lot of people they struggle with that. They struggle with prioritizing that particular risk.
So I think I'm interested in if you agree with me on this. I think a lot of people in security, CISOs, security professionals in general, like we generally come from the tech side, right? And so tech interests us. We find it interesting and cool. It intrigues us and mentally engages us. And so I almost think there's the shiny ball syndrome that people kind of chase the new, fun, interesting stuff. Asset management hasn't been solved, right? Still a problem.
Still blows me away.
Like you walk
yeah.
into a company, you don't know what you have. Vulnerability management. You walk into a company and you've still got all these vulnerabilities, and we know that that's the most likely entry point, right?
Yep.
Misconfiguration of vulnerabilities. But then you add ransomware on the top of it, and people say, well, yeah, I just don't have time to solve that. I'm going to go chase this really, really hard problem with really, really diminishing returns. Like that's an issue, right? How do we change that?
Well, I think, you have to rack and stack from a priority perspective what your risks are. And I don't pretend that this is easy to do. Putting together a risk register that shows all the risks I have in my organization, which by the way are different, they're certainly different between different sectors, but they're different between companies within a sector. So it's not like you can go pull one off the menu, a menu off the board and say, okay, these are the risks I have. You actually have to do the grunt work and figure out what are they. And
you have to understand the business first.
Right? You have to understand the business.
And that should translate into hopefully understanding what your risks are if you really understand the business, because you understand where you need to protect.
But I think, maybe to your earlier point though, ransomware is one of these universal threats. It doesn't matter what business you're in.
Yep.
You are a potential ransomware target. I mean, there are certain things, if there's a vulnerability in the OT environment and I'm a retail company, I don't have to worry about it. Well, I don't care. I don't have any OT stuff. Ransomware is not. It's a universal threat.
Yeah. We just see kind of across every industry, like everybody is potentially in the target. If it's monetizable, like you're in the target. So what do you think about in critical infrastructure? Like that seems to be an area where actors are really focusing, right? Whether it's healthcare, whether it's power and utility, like we see that focus, and it's almost like it was off the table for a while. But now I think they've realized, there's an incentive to pay, so let's double down and attack it.
And you know this, the term security by obscurity.
Yeah.
Really, OT, as you said, was not even recognized as something worth chasing for a long time, just till the last couple of years, actually, because it's a little bit harder, and up until 10 or 15 years ago, the air gap was real. There was an air gap between your OT devices and your IT devices that started disappearing 10, 15 years ago. It's completely gone today. And anybody who says that today, I just laugh at them.
I think the perception was, it used to be legacy was closed systems, right?
Yeah.
It was like, it's an Allen Bradley system. Nobody can get into it. But then the Allen Bradley system started moving to Windows-based systems where it was very common infrastructure, and it's no different than your office.
Exactly. Now, they may be segmented off, which, provides a little bit of security, but,
But that's even blended because people want the data to make business decisions.
That's exactly the reason why it's vulnerable. Colonial was the classic example of that. Colonial, their OT systems weren't compromised, but there was concern that because the IT systems were compromised, that because the IT systems were pulling data off of the OT systems for billing, that holy cow, maybe our OT systems are compromised. We got to take this whole thing offline.
Yeah. And that, look, I think I've heard that same kind of thing as a output of change, is that there was a lot of concern over how far it had gotten because it was so pervasive. It's like, look, we've got to replace everything. We can't be selective about what we do. And so I think it's just, it increases the impact.
So healthcare is this is not specific to healthcare, but healthcare is part of this issue, and that's in the IoT space. All these gazillions of IoT devices, and we had a chance to address this problem 10 years ago, And I think I even wrote something at the time like, okay, here's our opportunity to influence the development, the security development for IoT devices. We missed that opportunity. So, but to your point, healthcare, everything is an IoT device.
Yeah.
Literally everything in a hospital is an IoT device almost. So, so being able to compromise, by the way, they're not the only one. I worry about some of the other critical infrastructures that have devices that that we might not consider part of the critical infrastructure of those that are.
Yeah. It's the systemic nature of the risk, right?
Yeah.
Like everything's connected, so almost everything becomes an issue. And healthcare, strategically, typically underfunded. I really, really important.
Doesn't that
but
blow your
historically
way? It's
underfunded.
something so critically important that is underfunded. And by the way, if I had, and I have said this publicly, CISOs in the healthcare industry and in the education industry who are responsible for so much sensitive personal information, the fact that they have not, that their industries have not got on board is just shameful.
It really is, yeah. So what's your advice if a CISO's in, could be healthcare, could be something else, right? But there are all types of instances where CISOs are trying to manage limited resources, whether it be funding, headcount resources, right, whatever. How do they balance and how do they address something like ransomware where they're trying to manage limitations on resources or, have those discussions with the board or their other executive staff about that issue?
Well, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth now. We have to
Typical
avoid,
CISO.
I know. We have to avoid FUD. We have to avoid trying to scare people.
Yeah.
At the same time, and this is my personal experience, is that the best way to influence people is through use cases or examples. So if I was a healthcare CEO or CISO, I would say, look what happened to United Health Group. Look what happened to this hospital or this hospital or this hospital. And I would say we could take this risk off the table by investing a little bit of money in ransomware protection.
So do you think, we talked about this a little on one of the earlier podcasts we were doing, but do you think ransomware has become a national security issue? And
I do.
why? What classifies it? What brings it to that level? And I guess ultimately, what does that mean?
Good point. Good question. So I think, yeah, I do believe it is a national security issue. When we look at the organizations that have been impacted, healthcare organizations, local, state and local government organizations, energy companies, when these companies are impacted, their constituents, their customers are offline and can't do business. So there is not only the safety implications of it, a water treatment facility goes offline, there's the safety and health issues associated with the community that's serving. If a government agency goes offline, the ability to deliver driver's license is impacted. And healthcare, hospitals have to shut the doors. You divert ambulances to other facilities. Doctors can't access medical records. Every industry is impacted. So why is it a national security incident? There are economic implications to this that have national impact. Certainly have state and local government impact. Depending upon the magnitude of the event, though, it can have national level impact. And those economic impacts can have a ripple effect throughout the economy. You can see very easily where they could impact stock prices. They could impact interest rates. So, they don't have the kind of kinetic effect, that bombs do, but they have equally disruptive implications for society.
Yeah, look. If we had, if a if an actor, whatever the actor is, created some type of kinetic event that had a, $2.7 billion worth of cost or impact, like, would we react differently than a ransomware event with $2.7 billion of impact? I think evidence has showed out, yes, we do.
We
right?
would.
But why? I mean, is it just a kinetic fact? Is it the fear of it escalating? Like, what do you think
I hadn't thought of that. That's a great point. There is a fear, I think, that it would escalate. But I think part of it is the evolving nature of cybersecurity. And you mentioned earlier the maturity of where we are. I don't know, we've been doing this for a long time now.
Yeah.
And I can remember the good example.
We thought we'd solve it just a couple years.
2007, I tried everything I could do to get Governor Schwarzenegger to say something about cybersecurity in the State of the State speech. Could not get it to happen. Listen to any governor's State of the State speech this year. To this year, they'll all talk about cybersecurity. Yeah. So I think we have evolved, but we're not quite there yet.
So what do you think about with all these things happening, with the prevalence, the addition of the actors, with this national security conversation? Are we going to get ahead of threats like ransomware? Or are we always going to be in a state of playing catch up? Is it always just that one-upsmanship?
I would like to say no, but history says yes. I think, as technology changes, we're going to get better, but the bad guys are going to get better also. We're seeing this with AI now, that, as some of our security tools are just mind-blowing to me how good they're getting. But the bad actors are evolving just like we are. So there's always going to be a little bit of a reactive nature in our business. I don't, we haven't solved crime in any other aspect of our lives. So I think we're always going to.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? We are always kind of acting in that reactionary phase. So if you think about how we address a lot of this stuff, it's through regulation. And you spent some time in the government doing regulatory kind of things, DHS. What do you think we do from a regulatory standard on this? Is there a need for enhanced regulation? Is it a private sector issue and we should leave it alone? How do you play in that? Because the regulatory side is always catch up and seems to always really be behind.
Yeah, it's kind of the whack-a-mole piece approach, and that is, government reacts very quickly, or they react very quickly to when bad things happen. But unfortunately, some of that reaction is not effective. We talked about a little bit earlier. Compliance does not equal security, but non-security people, non-technical people don't really understand that. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I sat with a legislator or with the staff saying, well, we need a law to do this. I'm like, well, wait just a minute. Let's pause and think about what the implications of that are, because there are unintended consequences to everything. Mm-hmm. And, if you want to destroy a company's ability to make money, pass that law, because that's what's going to happen. Or if you want to, create a situation where they're disenfranchising people, yes, make that law. So, and I tell people this, I put it, every talk I give, I'm like, find out who your legislators are, both at the state and local and the federal level, call them up and just say, hey, here's who I am, I work in the industry, if you ever have a question about anything, call me. I'm happy to donate my time to the government to help answer your questions. And you'd be surprised at actually how many legislators take you up on that. I got a call last Friday from one who's like, hey, we're thinking about this, what do you think? And I was able to, no, I'm not saying I'm right or I'm smarter than everybody else, but I certainly have my opinion. And
it's at least hopeful that they're getting some input from people who've actually sat in the trenches versus have never done the job.
Exactly right.
So, regulation is one side of this, but there's potentially other areas for the government to get involved. And I was reading Richard Clark's book, Fifth Domain, right? And one of the interesting things that he actually talked about in there is that policy with cyber generally hasn't changed through several administrations, right? It's one of, if not the only thing that's been very consistent from a policy side is, we don't treat cyber intrusions and cyber crime as necessarily an escalation, and we don't go kinetic on it, right? It's this effort to kind of stay away from crossing that line. What about, do you think the government should get more involved in, not necessarily getting into cyber warfare, into kinetic warfare, but into actual enforcement and doing something to engage with the criminal actors? Like, there's a lot of things that could be done, but should they? Or should they kind of, this weird gray area where it's, we'll help you if you get attacked, look at, we'll certainly get the FBI engaged, but they won't really do anything to get you back up and running. They won't actually do anything to prevent it on the front side. And you can't do anything to hack back or it's, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. I think you get where I'm going.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I actually think the government has done a lot. If you look back at at least the last 3 administrations,
Okay.
there have been and I'm going to make a distinction here between the executive branch and the legislative branch. You look, President Obama, President Trump, and President Biden, all of them issued a number of executive orders on cyber-related activities, cyber-related things. There have been a number of national security memorandum that addressed cybersecurity-related issues. Now, none of them have the full force and effect of a law. They don't have any budgetary considerations. I guess they're recommendations. Now, recommendations for the private sector. Some of them have been very directive for federal government agencies. So there has been a few things that have happened on that side. On the legislative side, this is where this is where that can really have an impact. And again, talking out both sides of my mouth again, I'm not a huge fan of regulation, but when the safety and security of society is at stake, that's what government exists for. That's why we have a federal government, to protect society, to step in when there's no other alternative. And I think we've seen that companies are not going to just go buy stuff because it's a nice to do thing. Sometimes we got to have, somebody step in and say, we're directing you to do this.
That's a very valid point. So when you think about what the government's done, is it spread across too many different areas of government?
Yeah.
So we saw the creation during the Trump administration of Space Force, right? I've talked to some people that said, like, why don't we have a cyber force? Why don't we centralize this, right? Do you think that's a valid approach? Do you think it's being handled appropriately? Is it too peanut buttered around?
Yeah, that's a great analogy, by the way. So yes, I do think it is. I can remember throughout my entire tenure at DHS, probably the number one question I got was, we're not really sure who we're supposed to call when we have a security issue. Do we call DHS? Do we call the FBI? Do we call NSA or DOD? Do we call my local sheriff? And
I think when you call some of those people, they don't necessarily know how to respond.
You're exactly right. And they're like, no, call the FBI or call the Secret Service. So to answer your question, yes, 100%. And Harry Coker at the White House has really been beating this drum for the past year is on the harmonization of regulation, the harmonization of government support for cybersecurity. Because right now, in addition to the federal agencies like DHS and the FBI and Department of Justice and DOD, you have all these other agencies like the SEC and the FTC and the FCC and the EIEIO that but I just had this conversation on Friday night with a reporter who was asking my question, like, this is the problem is that every one of these agencies, every one of these sub-agencies is trying to fill the gap by saying, okay, well, we're not sure we can do this, but we're going to say we're doing it until somebody says we can't do it. So you have, and this is my personal opinion, you have.
Well, I think there's some feedback. The SEC trying to kind of fill a gap and like, do they have authority? Like this is the problem, right?
And the same thing with the FTC, and so yes, I think there definitely needs to be. Again, I'm going to use the word harmonization of rules, of regulations, but it should be centralized. I mean, think about the vast waste of resources and by the duplication of effort that we have right now across all these federal agencies. I mean, we could consolidate this down to one agency and probably, one, we'd get better service as citizens, and two, we'd have fewer people trying to do this work.
Yeah, okay, great point there. So if I wave the magic wand, and Mark Weatherford, you're now the cyber czar, what's the one policy change that you think would be most impactful?
I don't know if I would call it a policy change.
Pick anything. You're the cyber czar. You can do what you want.
I think we would start funding. We'd start providing funding, or we would figure out a way to begin supporting some of these smaller critical infrastructures that don't have support today. Whether it's by money or time or regulation or whatever it might be, we would find a way to start providing resources to them so that they could engage in this battle. Again, remember, 20, 30 years ago, when Russia or China attacked a U.S. organization, the federal government would be the first person to step in. Today, they're attacking everybody, and it's an unfair fight.
There's no real help.
There's no help. Yeah. So I would figure out a way that we need to up level security for everybody. And again, I think I'm not for throwing money at problems, but it's going to take money to do that.
Yeah, I think sometimes it does. So we've talked a lot about the government side of it. So what about on the private industry side? Like a lot of times essentially the incentives are in conflict between government and private industry. So what do you think private industry can do to better align with government to kind of address these issues?
So I think there's a distinction to be made, and I call it the Fortune 500 and the unfortunate 5,000.
Okay.
The Fortune 500 typically have resources to address some of these problems. The unfortunate 5,000, that's actually much more than
bigger,
that.
yeah.
They don't have those resources, and they don't have the skills. So I'm not saying that the Fortune 500 should subsidize the unfortunate 5,000, but there's a way to float everybody's boat just a little bit higher. I don't know exactly how I would do that if I was had a magic wand. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the government stepping in and fixing everything, but
we're the government and we're here to help.
But it's a different era now. I mean, we can't apply the same philosophies in 2024 that we applied in 1984. Technology has changed and made everybody vulnerable that in a way that they weren't, 50 years ago.
It's almost like this is one area where everybody needs to be kind of in it together to win it.
Yeah, and you sound very altruistic when you say it or benevolent when you say it like that, but it's really true.
Yeah. So if we think forward, what do you think the next big thing is that disrupts cyber? Like, where should we be looking?
Well, I'm not the first person to say it, but I think quantum is going to disrupt everything. Everything that we're doing today,
rears its head.
everything that we're doing today is going to be rendered obsolete when quantum becomes mainstream.
Okay, so a lot of people out there hear quantum, right? And the word gets thrown around. I think a lot of people don't understand, like when you say everything will be disrupted, like why? Why, Mark Weatherford?
Well, because quantum will be able to do things that we simply can't do today. The common thing that everybody talks about is, oh my God, encryption will be obsolete. Well, yes, it will, which means that everything that is protected by encryption today is going to be open season.
So, very valid point. I've said this myself. I want to ask you a question and get your thought on it, your input. So, for many years, people didn't report on incidents because they said, oh, the data that was exfiltrated was encrypted, so it was not accessible, so I don't have to report on it. So let's say tomorrow, quantum comes to fruition, and all of a sudden, all that encryption's invalid. Do we have to go and do post-reporting on all that stuff that's been exported? Didn't think about that one, did you?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, well, I would say the world, when quantum becomes mainstream, the world has changed.
Yeah.
In a way that we have never, ever seen before. I mean, we talk about Gen AI, we talk about AI more broadly, and they are really changing the world. Quantum is going to change that by orders of magnitude.
So what's your insight into how far out? Is that 3 years, 5 years, 20 years? What's your guess?
People way smarter than me are figuring that out. But people, everything I'm hearing and reading. In fact, I watched a talk by a scientist at IBM last week, and he said 2029, 2030.
That's what, yeah.
So
I think I saw the same
years.
thing, yeah. So it's coming, it's imminent, right?
It's almost here. And, and I tell people, you need to start thinking about it today. Now, what can you do about it? I'm not quite sure because there are no solutions today. But at least the government, where that moves slower than the private sector, they need to start thinking about this. And I don't know what kind of controls we could put in place, what kind of laws we can put in place. But we definitely need to recognize that this is on the horizon, people.
Okay. So you're not working for an AI company, right? And AI is all the rage. Everybody's talking about AI. How does it shift? How does AI shift kind of the defensive strategy that people need to be thinking about from a cyber perspective and maybe ransomware in specific? Like, where does AI factor into cyber?
Well, AI, and I have great hopes for it, and it's happening already. AI is able to ingest data, and we've talked about this in security from a platform perspective for a number of years now, where if you have a platform and you're able to connect all different kinds of devices and protocols, and make faster decisions, AI is speeding that up by thousands, millions of times, where I can take, and we're seeing this in some companies are already using AI to say, okay, here's my infrastructure. I have all of these devices. Oops, sorry.
It's all right.
Waving my hand. All these devices, all these people, all these geographies, and I want to detect anomalies in real time, whether that's somebody opening a door that they shouldn't in a location that they shouldn't, or ransomware. If I detect exfil or I detect encryption, that I can stop that immediately. And I think that's AI's promise for security. We're able to speed up both the prevention side, the recovery side, and the exfil prevention side of things in ways that we just haven't been able to before.
So do you have any concerns about AI being used in kind of the negative connotation, right? I mean, I think, we can all think about how we've talked about ransomware, how different threat actors and jurisdictions that don't have, the same legal basis that we do. That's a concern in the ransomware side. But in the AI side, like not doing it or not developing AI in an ethically or morally correct way, like there's potential for that, right? Like, how do you see that as an outcome?
Well, it's just, it's like the constant battle, ever since the beginning of mankind, bad guys have tried to circumvent the rules. And we're seeing it already. Just like AI is a great benefit to mankind, the bad guys are going to take advantage of that and use it to their advantage. Do
you think that that'll be something that we won't be able to control or get in front of?
I think it's going to be a constantly, it's funny, somebody asked me this a while back and gave me a little bit of time to think about it. I think we're in a period of time right now where perhaps the good guys and the bad guys are even. I see a period where this is shrinking, where the bad guys are getting less bad and the good guys are getting more good.
Okay.
I think that AI is going to help us combat the bad guys quicker and more efficiently and more reliably. Reliability is a big thing. Do we have false positives? Do we have hallucinations? We've seen that in 2 years since ChatGPT. Hallucinations. Not that they don't still exist, but the data is so much better now than it was 2 years ago.
So I listened to somebody talk the other day about AI. We were having a conversation about it, and they said, they're not so much concerned about the long term because right now AI is really good at kind of looking at information and making judgments about that information, but it's not really good at the creative side, right? Actually doing true creative work.
What do you mean by that? I mean, because I think it's very good at creative.
It can only create based upon existing data. That was their
Gen AI. You're
right. Versus being able to come up with a new concept with the lack of foundational data, right? So ideating. Do you think that is going to realistically change in the short term, or do you think that will be kind of the state of the state for a while?
I think it's changing, and you're right. It's based on what exists today, but you're familiar with the Turing test. Alan Turing, created the Turing test that basically said.
I think there was an AI that passed that somewhat recently, that passed the Turing test, and they were still saying that it didn't really pass it, but
but not yet.
Yeah,
but we're close. I mean, AI is close to the point where it can make decisions and it can be creative in a way that can't be discerned whether it's a computer or a human making that. So we're not there yet, at least as far as I know, but there's no doubt, 100% certainty that it's going to happen.
Okay. So I think one of the challenges around cyber, and I'm also going to, I think, apply this to AI as well, is that there's a big haves and haves not divide, right? So very large organizations can afford to put the money into kind of R&D and like play around with technologies where, look, you're a 50-person company. How much time can you actually spend on looking at cool and interesting stuff that may change the game for you, but you're worried about just closing business for the next month, right? Is there anything that you think on the innovation side or you're seeing that's closing that divide, or are you concerned that will continue to widen and for AI and cyber we'll continue to have this haves and have-nots and it'll get worse and kind of exacerbate the problem? I
think the haves and have-nots are coming to the middle. when I think about Gen AI, when I think about ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, they're available to everybody. And I have some friends that are doing, I won't even call it research, I call it goofing around, but they're discovering some amazing things that they can use these tools for. So, I mean, there's always going to be have and have not. I mean, if I want to go out and build a new data center with all of NVIDIA's chips,
It's going to cost you.
it's going to cost me. But if I want to buy a cloud service that uses that same data center, that is accessible to me. And I think we're going to see a lot of the big players, the GDPs, the Azures, the AWSs, make that service available. I mean, yeah, it's going to be still going to have to pay for it, but the cost is going to have to go down. The economics are going to drive it down.
Okay. So let's talk controversy. What's the most controversial stance you've taken on cyber that you've had others disagree with?
Was I right or wrong?
It doesn't matter. It was just, I just want to know controversial.
So I was right. I'll give you the one I was right. And that was the cloud. I think I mentioned this story earlier. I was a CISO for the state of California. It was 2009, 8 or 9. And like once a year, I would get all of the CISOs or security directors from all of the state agencies in one room, and we would have a day-long meeting. We'd kind of like strategize, and of course, I would give my bloviation at the beginning, and my bloviation was, "Hey, this cloud thing is coming. We need to pay attention to it." And that's when I just got blasted. People literally, they're like, "You're crazy. There's no way that we're ever going to do that, especially with public information." So that was my prediction, and I was right. I'm trying to think of one that I was wrong, that I made a big point on. I can tell you this is not, yeah. When I was at DHS, I was asked to provide funding for all of the ISACs.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I forget how many ISACs there were at the time. I was providing funding for only one ISAC, the MS, the multi-state ISAC. And this came up and said, "Well, wait a minute, why don't you provide funding to all of the ISACs and kind of up-level everybody?" I'm like, does financial services really need my help? So we basically said, no, we're not going to do that. And I regret that.
Okay.
Because there are some of the ISACs that could have really benefited from some DHS support. Not just financial support, but from moral support.
Yeah.
For just to add credibility to the industry. So that was one I regret.
I appreciate the self-reflection. It's really good. So, we've talked a lot about ransomware and cyber, and when you think about ransomware, do you think we've reached a point where companies just shouldn't pay, or is it still like you do what's right for you? Like, because at its core level, paying really only does incentivize this behavior, right? So what's your
decision,
take?
really, really tough decision. And I get both arguments, but having been on the end of one of those conversations when business is stopped and you can start business back up with one simple decision, me personally, I say it's very situationally dependent.
So do you think,
if I'm a hospital, if I'm some piece of critical infrastructure and, 1 million people are out without a service because I'm not going to spend $50,000, pretty hard to justify that.
So do you think that precludes the government ever making ransomware payments illegal? Like, and recognize it when I say that it probably couldn't happen if just the U.S. did it. It would have to be the majority of
Yeah.
the good actors,
Yeah.
right? If they said yes, we're gonna make it illegal if you get caught paying a crypto payment for ransomware.
I think it would
Would that change the game?
It would be really painful for a period of time.
For a period of time, yeah.
Until the actors said, okay, well,
Tap dried.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're right. It would take a universal or a global response to that.
So if there's one cyber myth that you could debunk for good, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to go back to my OT days, and I wouldn't even say OT. The myth of an air gap. I call it the mythical air gap in OT. It does not exist, but people still seem to cling to it. Not universally. I can remember I was talking to 3 CEOs in a particular industry, and they all said, no, our stuff is behind the air gap. So I think that would be one thing, because I'm deeply invested, philosophically anyway, in the OT world, in the manufacturing, energy, electricity, and oil and gas, water, these sectors that depend on OT technologies, and I keep hearing this pop up, and I think, God, it's 2024. This myth died 10 years ago. So that would be one for sure.
All right, good call on that one. I like that. And then, as we wrap up, what would you like people out there to take away from our conversation today? What's your final thoughts?
Wow. Should have thought of this in advance.
Spontaneity is always good.
Yeah, I think, we're in a place where, as a society, both not just a U.S. society, but a global society, where security is having impact on safety of the society. So there needs to be more of a recognition that that while regulation has a role, it can't be looked at as the panacea that solves everything. And it's like the old adage, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
And I think governments often look at, we can solve anything with regulation. And that's just not true.
Mark, it's been really great having you on today. I want to appreciate you for coming on, and it was great getting serious with you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be here.